Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your faithful host James, and we are talking to Mr. Gerald Clark today. Gerald is obviously the returning author doing a featured podcast on CapricornRadio.com, and we are enjoying Gerald's wonderful research and philosophy that he has learned and studied and brought to the attention of the world through his two books, Anunnaki of Nibiru and Seventh Planet Mercury Rising, his latest, which is what we're talking about today. And wonderful stuff from Gerald. Gerald, are you back with me?
Yeah, I am, brother.
Oh, great to have you here again, Gerald. We talked a little bit before the break about the hillbilly rules of learning, which we're going to get into first, and the Adapa tale, and these players, Gazeta, Demuzi, Adapa, Enki, and Anu, and what this all really means. And we're going to tie it together in the second half of the show. I guess let's start with the hillbilly rules for learning and what this means.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to do is, before we get into the Adapa tale, I want you to realize that Adapa was trained by Enki, and he was really smart, okay? Mm-hmm. He was the first priest serving the city of Eridu in the next tale. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about learning. You know, we assimilate a lot of data, we look at lots of stuff, we're processing, we're trying to correlate, we're trying to end up with the state of the world, right? Well, in this process, I decided to disclose the method that I've used all through academia for me to assimilate data and do what I do. And, you know, I'm not generally one that toots my own horn, and I didn't even know what I was capable of until I was put into a situation that I had to perform that way, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, I graduated magna cum laude from UCSD, so I was a really good student. Mm-hmm. So I'm just sharing from that standpoint, with people, and I do it in a way, I call it hillbilly rules of learning, because I was 17 years old when I went off and back to San Diego, and I was totally a hillbilly, okay? And I was looking for a model on how to assimilate knowledge, because I'd never been exposed to anything like that.
Sure.
So what did I discover about learning, hillbilly learning? Well, from my exposure, I believe there are 4 levels of learning, and I think they're pretty straightforward. You start out at the rote level, it's memorization, mm-hmm. and then if you're inclined and it's interesting to you, you might try to understand it. Okay. So there's rote understanding. And then if you really want this knowledge to become wisdom in your life, you have to apply it. And most people know that. You have to apply something before it and make it real for you. Otherwise it just gets flushed, right? And then the last one is correlation. So once you've learned these chunks of wisdom, they end up as, little tokens, if you will, stored in your cortronic processor, your brain. But then if you connect the dots between pieces of wisdom, I believe that's the highest level of learning. Okay. So let's kind of do these. So in the rote memorization state, there's actually, this is generally what people do to get through school.
Sure.
Is rote. Okay. And then there's some understanding and maybe very little application, and definitely hardly any correlation unless you're a really gifted mathematician like Ramanujan. Mm-hmm. Okay. But in the rote process, I break that down into 4 different steps. There's a way to assimilate information from a book that we know works. And it has to do with the design of your brain and how it assimilates data into the short-term memory, churns on it, comes up with something, and then ends up in the long-term memory if it's pertinent to you or interesting. So in that process, generally, before you read something, you kind of want to have the questions in your mind of what it is you're trying to answer before you go expose yourself to this data. And for example, in physics and mathematics, they often will assign you all kinds of problem sets that you have to do when you read through this chapter and then do your problems, and generally have to turn them in as part of your homework, right? So there's your questions that you're trying to answer right there if you want to be pragmatic in physics or science. But lots of other courses are the same way. So now you're going to go through and survey that material. Look at all the pictures. See the extent of what you've got to assimilate. And while you're doing that, keep in mind those questions you have. You might put a little check mark. Okay, there's the answer to that question. That one. Okay. And you may not have to stay there and read it, but you're just surveying this point, trying to see the full scope of what it is you're trying to assimilate in your brain. Okay. So once you've surveyed it, you want to read it through. Okay. So now you've prepped yourself. You've created these little chasms in your memory such that they can be filled in by the questions when you find them. Okay, so you've created a space for the answers. So now you're reading it, and then comes the recitation to really make that rote memorization complete. And it's different for everybody. Okay, some people can read something one time and they've got it. Other people got to do it 3 times. And everybody has to be honest with themselves and go, it takes me 3 times and it takes Joe over there 1. I'm really envious, but I still got to do 3 times. Well, do 3 times. Do whatever it takes with your handicap, if you will. Not everybody's wired the same way.
Sure.
And,
sure.
you know, yeah, I mean, I saw people that were wired that were just, you'd think, are you an automaton? How can you solve problems like that in your head? And I've met people like that, okay? So now you've questioned, you've surveyed, you read it, you're reciting the stuff that you have to memorize, and reciting oftentimes is really augmented by creating really silly acronyms for long lists of things. For instance, if you had to memorize every Latin prefix to all the measurements from exa, atta, peta, millicenta, all the way through in order, you could create a silly acronym out of it and you memorize it. And this happens a lot in med school where they have long lists of Latin things you have to memorize.
Like the colors of the rainbow, people
yeah,
in
red,
England.
orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. So, people will make up a silly saying, or for the musical scale. Well, you do that for a long list. It's very helpful for rote memorization.
In England, we say for the colors of the rainbow, we said Richard of York gave battle in vain. Which actually means something, that Richard of York gave battle in vain, which means that when you take the acronym, all the letters, the first capital letter of the sentence means the colors of the rainbow.
Exactly. So the fact that you memorize that, I have an acronym that I use to memorize all the zodiacal houses in order. I have one to memorize all the prefixes for measurements. It stuck with me from way back when. I have one for memorizing the animal kingdom. I have a couple of them that I found out, and the sillier it is, the better. For some reason, I don't know why that is, but if you make it just, or it's relevant knowledge, like what you said, with the history encoded in it. But whatever it is, that's a good way to do it, to rote memorize long lists of things. And speaking of that, I have to toot my own kid's horn real quick. He was in middle school, and they were just learning about, I think, the symbol pi. And he was quite a mental anomaly anyway, prodigy, if you will. This is Matthew, my oldest son, who's at Caltech. He graduates this year. Wow. As an engineer, okay?
Excellent.
Yeah. So he came home one day, and it turns out the teacher was upset with him because he was sitting in the back of the room not paying attention, reading a book while they were doing whatever they were doing, talking about pi and math and whatever. And I guess he took the rebuke and decided on the spot that he was going to show them that not only was he listening, but he was far above where they were. So he memorized pi to, I think, 99 decimal places and repeated it forward and backward within a 30-minute period.
Wow.
And he came home and did this for me, and I was like, dude, you must be the worst thorn in your teacher's side ever.
Wow.
And at that point, I probably should have recognized that he was a prodigy, and he really had no business being in public school. He really needed to be challenged. The way I challenged him at home, I taught him how to program a computer by the time he was 11 or 12. And Michael, my other son, was an anomaly too. He had extreme social intelligence and everybody's wired differently, and we recognize that and tried to fan the flames of both of them. But not to get too far off the subject. So now we. Go ahead.
So just to add to that, just while you mentioned it spurred up a memory. Do you know who Daniel Tammet is?
No.
I love telling you about these people, Gerald, because you don't know who it's like. I'm just like, you gotta look up.
That's the interesting thing. You're in Ireland, and you have a whole different set of people that are in your.
Are you ready for this? I'm gonna blow your mind. You ready for this? Okay. Daniel Tammet was born with Asperger's or autism, as well as epilepsy, and he had an epileptic fit that rewired his brain when he was a kid. He was able to do extreme math calculations. He can speak something like 9 languages at present. He is a savant, but he is a savant with social skills that can explain his savant skills. He's the only known example of a savant, an extreme savant, okay, that can explain. He has social skills. What I mean is he has the full. Amazing. So he's the only known example that has the full social skills in his autistic spectrum. Yeah. However, the point is he memorized the value of pi to 22,500 places, Gerald.
Wow.
Okay, and
how long did it take him?
It took him 4.5 hours to recite it, just to recite it. It took 4 mathematicians to make sure he did it word perfect. Do you know how he did it, Gerald? He did it because he has I think the numbers 1 to 800 in his head as a shape, smell, and color and texture. And he can multiply like 64 by, 396 instantly, or he can, take this cubed root of whatever, and he does extreme math and he melts the numbers together. And then when he does that, he reads the number like it's a landscape.
Wow.
And here's the thing. He's not only that, he can speak languages in a week. They put him to the test. He actually went and met the real Rain Man. And the boy with the incredible brain, I think you'll get it on YouTube, Gerald. You gotta watch it. You just love it because of...
With the incredible brain?
Yeah, I know. That's for the audience too. You gotta look this up. If you haven't seen the boy with the incredible brain, it is just incredible. I tried to get Daniel Tammet on the show, but, his publicist won't talk to me.
Spell his last name for me.
Tammet. To put Daniel Tammet to the test, they said, can you speak a language in a week? Yeah. Well, how about learning the world's most difficult language, Icelandic? He goes, no problem. So they sent him to Iceland. And then when he went and spoke Icelandic with a person for 1 week. And by the time he was finished to put him to the test, they put him on a live TV interview to see could he speak it. And he held conversation and joked and laughed with them in Icelandic.
No pressure there, huh?
No pressure, like. But I just, you sparked off the thing about the memorizing pi to 22,500 places. But what's important though is, Gerald, that we are now able to look into the autistic mind from somebody who is autistic, but also has the social skill to, to relay that. Whereas if you look at the Kim Peek, the real Rain Man, he was just locked in a left brain world with no corpus callosum and, one of the most extreme memory retentions ever known on the planet and probably will never be surpassed. He could read a book in 8 minutes, start to finish, by using his left eye inwards and his right eye inwards on the 2 opposite pages. But again, he had no social skills to relay his extreme abilities. But the difference is that Daniel Tammet does. Incredibly interesting story. Sorry for going off topic, Gerald.
Actually, what you bring up is kind of a generic topic of what are the limits of human capabilities, whether it's thinking, sensing, performing telepathy, co-creating, all these things, what as a species can we truly do, and and where can we find the answers? Well, studying people like this gives us a kind of a peek into this archetypal being that was created, that sometimes when something goes awry, the real capabilities show up that maybe all of us have that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and here's the thing, and a good point. Go back into the archetypal way, or Daniel Tammet. If Daniel Tammet has this ability and is able to function in a social sense, why can't we all have it? We used to think, until we became known of Daniel Tammet, we used to think that you either had to be autistic with a fully left brain or a fully right brain autism, to have these extremes ability. And to be that extreme, there's a trade-off. You lose something, like you lose social skills. But there is an example of it happening on the planet where we have that extreme intelligence on so many levels and the social skills where there's no major loss. So it is a possibility, Gerald, is I guess the point.
Well, I know we're kind of jumping ahead just slightly, and I'll come back to the road understanding application correlation in just a second. But you triggered my thought about the idea of us potentially not being able to have a capability unless there's something extreme happens. And in biopopulations, when you look at genetic algorithms that deal with population dynamics, generally the change is introduced when the parents have a progeny, an offspring. And that's where the potential for a genetic mutation comes up. It might rewire the circuits, and now the brain's working, really great. Or it introduces a feature that's not desirable, and it doesn't pass the life function, and that progeny dies off. Well, in the first case, hopefully, if it's beneficial to the species, it gets perpetuated among the whole populace, and it ends up being a primary attribute that they take on. Well, now consider that humans are in the same predicament. We're looking at extreme anomalies that happen in processing and memory and performance and all these in other people, and we go, well, none of that's applicable to me because I can barely get off the couch, or just whatever, or I can't even read a book, or just whatever it is you find is your limitation. Well, what if you had the knowledge right here, right now, that could change you dynamically, not waiting for your progeny to receive this benefit that's accessible to you now? That's the truth. Mm. That's the part that people don't know. Mm-hmm. Because if they did, they wouldn't be spending their time, or their lives wasting it on superficial things. They'd be looking for achieving their full instantiation of this material form on this planet so they could be all they were going to be. And I hope that doesn't sound like an ad for the Army. Be all that you can be. But it's true. If you have the knowledge, which is power, you can be all that you can be. Mm. So in that process of being a good student of the Atlantean records that Thoth gave us, he tells us in there, first of all, two things. Number one, I wrote it in a way that triggers an Atlantean rhythm in your mind if you read it. Okay, so he's using an entrainment technique to access a brainwave frequency so you can learn good. Okay? Second thing he promised you is if you do that, your wisdom will increase 100-fold. That's what he promised right in the document. Okay? Wow. So, that's it. Okay, there's an easy one to go get your IQ bump real easy. Do what he said. And I think he's absolutely right. Okay? So, let's go back to rote understanding application course. So we got deep into questions, survey, read, recite, review. Now the review part we didn't do. Now it's test day. You've done those three previous parts to get your data. And you got to do this for every class, not just one, right?
Yeah.
For the classes that are hard, you're going to have to do more of this for than the classes that are easy for you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now it's test day. You've done the question, the survey, the read, recite, review. Okay, now you're really only at a place at rote memorization. That's not where it ends. It may be good enough for you to meet that test, but if you want that knowledge, you got to go to understanding. That means you got to take that concept, that theorem, whatever it is, and truly try to understand it. Well, why is it that way? Ask some questions. Okay? Stand under it and let it resonate with you. And that's understanding something, okay? Well, that's not where it ends either before you go to the next party on the campus and flush all the data for the next course, okay? That's generally what happens. Well, then, while that data is sitting in your Cortronic network, this very small layer that resides in your, it's like a 3 millimeter thin sheath over the cerebellum. Okay, they call it the Cortronic layer. Well, inside that layer, there's some very special cells that are involved in creating, if you will, without getting too technical, a neural network that adjoins neurons via synapses, and it can happen as an adult. It's not fixed. The more you work that area, the more it rewires. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the understanding portion, you've got this rote information stuffed in your short-term memory. Well, now you've got a limited time, because we know if you read a book, blah, 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 and you get all this, and it's fascinating. Well, where is that information in your memory 3 weeks from now?
Yeah, it's not in the long-term memory.
Your short-term memory is short-term for a reason.
Yeah.
So while it's in the short-term memory, you've got to do the understanding, and most importantly of all, you've got to do the application. You have to take that and apply it to you somehow, some way. Okay, I came to this junction of road. If I'd have known that, I would have done this. Make it real for yourself. Apply it in some way. And when you do that, something very special happens, in that potentially this neural network that you've been using as your interface to information as your mind, but it's also accessible to the creator of all and all the people that can read your meat modem, okay? You're putting something in a space that now is accessible to the quanta, or that can see where you're trying to get an answer. It's lodged in tokens in your Cortronic network. Mm-hmm. Guess what they have the ability to do? They have the ability to create a new token in your Cortronic network remotely, or add, join, and connect some tokens so that you become the receiver of the answer in the question that you're seeking. This is the mystical part of learning. Okay? And when you do that, you've got a golden little nugget sitting up there that is a treasure for you. Okay? It's a life lesson that you got because you took a few extra steps somebody else didn't. They didn't just do the rote thing and flush. Okay? That's an abuse of knowledge, in my opinion. Okay, but that's how the system is set up. That's not how it used to be. Okay? Well, the last level is once you have these golden little nuggets of wisdom from the application process that were right for your path, and it's not going to be every single one, but the ones that are right for your path are going to stick. And guess what? At that point, you can start connecting them together. And that's the highest level of the game, is correlation learning. You're connecting those little pieces of wisdom into a bigger picture that keeps unfolding. And that's what we're doing right now. I hope you realize that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's why I wanted to go over my hillbilly lessons of learning. But listen, I put it in the book for that reason, because there's a deep connection to your neural network. And when you find out what the capabilities of a neural network are, you'll realize they're very efficient in dealing with external objects, mapping through bidirectional associative memory, affiliating that object with this location space in your mind. Okay, and we have a very large capacity for storing tokens in our brain. Okay? As a matter of fact, we know what that number is. I won't go into that right now, but it's quite large. It's several HD 1080p movies, many of them in their full capacity at 2.4 gigabits per second stored in your memory. Okay,
Gotcha.
Lots of them.
Gotcha.
So it's a large capacity. Well, if you can get to that place of connecting tokens in this correlation level of learning, that's where the magic is. And the sooner you start that, the better.
I'm so glad you mentioned this, Gerald, because there's so many people. I watch it. I'm unusual case in that I have an experiential way of learning. And that's why I like complexity. But complexity is easy for me, whereas simple concepts are harder. And that may seem counterintuitive to most people. It doesn't really matter for the case of what I'm about to say, but I have an experiential way of learning. Unless I experience it, I don't remember it. But if I experience it, I never forget it.
That's the application part.
And that's the application part. But that's the thing that I find the easiest, Gerald. And the other stuff I don't. But that comes from me first. I'm trying to experience.
I hope that's a revelation for you.
Oh, it is, and it's nice.
As a student, the fact that you do that is why we're having this conversation.
But because not only that,
you went up the learning chain. You didn't just take on the capacity of a talking head. So that.
And the downside, that there is a downside, Gerald, in that I do this very easy, but the problem is I try to experience something before I've done the learning. And it's a kind of reverse process for me. It's a unique case, but I really understand.
That's kind of like surveying before you actually create the whole for the question survey, read, recite, review process. But you're doing multiple things beyond just rote. That's what I'm.
But the thing is,
you're getting understanding and you're getting application.
Yeah, the application is the most important part of the thing anyway. I mean, most people would kill for what I have, the understanding complexity in an instance.
What you've done by being exposed to all these different knowledge from these different authors and such in your radio program capacity, just like Einstein got to see all these patents working in the patent office. Mm-hmm. Because you've done what you've done, you've generated several tokens of wisdom, and it's connecting the dots. So the fact that you can jump from one subject to another so readily is because you're operating at a correlation level of learning.
Yeah. Like I say, I excel in complexity. I excel in the learning experiential. The more complex, the more varied subjects, the more I excel. The more, if you put me in a simple, mundane environment, I go crazy trying to remember something simple. Which is fine. I mean, but there is, even if it's just the other way around for normal people, that's fine. I mean, the problem is a lot of people do that hard work and they don't do that last experiential application part.
Right. They're losing it. There's a time constraint, and this is it. The time that wrote information that you got into your short-term memory, that time frame, whatever it is for you, is the time you have to apply it, or it's gone.
And I see people not doing that, Gerald. I see them not applying what they've learned. And the thing is, if you just applied it for the sake of it, you'll never forget it. Yeah,
it reminds me of these self-help books.
Use it or lose it, basically, Gerald. Use it or lose it.
Yeah, it's use it or lose it, absolutely. And, what's abominable to me, without getting too negative, is that the education system, especially in America, has been set up to basically facilitate the rote memorization process, regurgitate on a test, because they're set up that way, and then you flush it and you go on to the next one. And because of the workload that they give the kids, you really have no time to do any of the other processes.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, compare and contrast that with a dialogue between Plato and Socrates. A dialogue like what we're doing is the key to exploring new knowledge without defending some belief, and it moves the information state along such that those tokens can be rewired. Okay?
You know what?
So dialogue is key.
Do you know what I realize as well? Something, Gerald, and I realized this ability in me in my mid-20s, and in a way I've kind of understood the rote learning process that you've just described, Gerald. But in my own understanding, in my own way, I know exactly what you're talking about because I've experienced it. However, I used to read, for example, a book about ancient Egypt from an engineering perspective. And then I would read a book about ancient Egypt from an astronomer's perspective, an archaeoastronomy or some astronomy theory. And then I'd read it from the Egyptology perspective. And then I would have read ancient Egypt, something about the pyramids, from 3 different angles, from 3 different reasons. It's all, in one respect, the same subject area, but all 3 different theories for 3 different reasons. But some of the same names of the same people might be crossing over. And in that little complexity and the experience of, that was an experience for me. And in that experiential event of 3 different theories, but the same subject matter from the same angle, there was a crossover information there. And I could feel my neural pathways being burnt with that information. And I can retain information that I read when I was younger, Jana. Just like I could just recite it, Gerald, like it was in that room. I can even tell you the smell and the environment of the room I was in, the time of day. And I know there is times that when I read something and I can feel it getting burnt into my neural pathways and that neural network. I know
that process for me was extreme when I was reading some of the almost poetic styles that the Sumerians used, and it really changes your assimilation of information.
Mm-hmm. And I actually looked into neuroscience to understand memory as a result of this. I look up everything. I look up all sorts of subjects. I've everything from, science, psychology, history, geography, politics on my shelf there. I read everything. I'm just reading fact books, and I always did that. But I realized that what's known from neuroscience is that when you read a piece of fact and let's say you read something about Egypt, for example, your brain, the second time you read something about Egypt, it will try to go down the same neural pathway, but may not use the exact same pathway. But by the time it goes down the 3rd time, it will definitely get burnt in as a permanent fixture. And that neural pathway is burnt permanently in your brain forever. So it goes down it opens up a new channel, a new neural pathway first time. The second time, it tries to go down the same route. It may or may not get half the route, or it's just basically like driving down a road and trying to remember directions. That's basically.
Well, people that get paralyzed or something that have to go through re-movement therapy. So, associating the external world with your memory, there's a concept in quadratic processing where the external world is associated through a bidirectional associative process with a token packet, if you will, like a series of dots that represent something in the external world. Well, and it doesn't have to be exactly precise, and kind of leads to the idea of fuzzy logic or fuzzy processing. Mm-hmm. But in that affiliation process, there's some really interesting transformations that happen. And also, the correlation between those tokens and a limb, for instance, knowing how to reach out and pick up an object, and all these activities are stored as tokens and that can be connected together in motion to cause an effector to do, an articulation with an arm like a robot, okay? Well, all these get trained into your motor processing, and athletes know this. They perform the same athletic thing over and over and over again to burn this capability into their neural processing, okay? Or with any kind of visualization where you walk through a competition or whatever, you can pre-train your system to be at its optimal state by doing this. Right? You with me?
Oh yeah, totally. Fascinating, Gerald. Fascinating, Gerald. I'm a little worried about time, and I really do want to. I do want to get into the Adapa tale. Adapa goes to heaven. This is really exciting for me. I've been waiting on this one
I know. Yeah. Well, this will finish off chapter 4, so we can get off to talking about the holographic universe and all the deep stuff that's in the Emerald Tablets.
Oh, the Emerald Tablets.
Not that there's not more after that in the book. That's only chapter 5, and we got 6 through 12 still to do. Okay, so
well, the Emerald Tablets is a hot potato on the list. Before you go there, Gerald, I do want to say we are doing the Anunnaki Realm of the Maya conference in the Yucatan. You'll catch that on GeraldClark77.com or JamesSwagger.com tours events page. And just want to give that little mention before you go, Gerald, because I know what it's like when I get you started. And of course, you can get 7 Planet Mercury Rising in the YouTube description if you just click there. So, okay, Gerald, let's talk about Adapa Goes to Heaven.
Okay, so going back to the Atrahasis, Enki created this being that they decided was going to be the primitive man archetype. Some of them call him Adam or the Adapa. It was the same being. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, at one point, I think Enki, being the scientist and creator of this being, had to account for what he did to his father. Essentially, he just introduced a new mining capability, a new tool. Mm. Okay, so he actually gave direction to Ningshita, who was called Gazeta in the account, and his other son, Dumuzi, to escort the Adapa to meet his father, Anu, on Nibiru. And now, Sitchin tells an account in the Lost Book of Enki where a tablet was given secretly to Ningshita, then given to Anu, explaining the design constraints of this being, which makes a lot of sense to me, even though it doesn't show up in Stephanie Dawley's version. Okay? And so in Stephanie Dawley's version from the Myths of Mesopotamia, this being, Adapa, apparently was very, very wise. And he did all the cooking and the priestly functions in the city of Eridu when they were supposedly thrown out of the Garden of Eden, right, which was in Eridu. He and the female Eve. Well, he was intersected and taken to the temple. So he may have left the garden, but he went right around the corner and ended up the chief priest, the first one in Eridu. And he was taught significant knowledge by Enki. So much so that in the tale, he's out fishing and he gets the fish for feeding the people, including Enki. He's like Enki's primary servant, okay? Mm-hmm. And so he's talking about it, serving his Lord Ea, Enki, and he's going out fishing, and all of a sudden he gets caught up in a storm. Well, you realize that Enki was the Lord of the Water, so he basically gets upset over the idea that the ocean is acting against him because his progenitor, his deity that he serves, in control of this. So he does something that he probably would not normally have done. And apparently the storm was severe enough that it knocked him out of the boat. Okay. Well, he incited something of some deep priestly knowledge that Enki had taught him about controlling the elements. Now that sounds really crazy and unbelievable. As we move on through this discussion in this book, this will not be as unbelievable as it seems now. Okay? He did sort of an incantation that caused the south wind, apparently he was in a sailing vessel, to cease for 7 days. Now this was interesting that it was for 7 days. Are you with me?
Oh yeah, I'm listening, bro. I'm attentive.
Okay. So when he did that, apparently, because of the rules of the holographic simulator that he instantiated to make this happen, he got the attention of Anu on Nibiru, who was monitoring everything, if you will. Okay? Well, that's why Enki was summoned to tell him, hey, you need to send this being up here and introduce me to who this is that just did what, Basically, he's got a primitive worker that's using knowledge about the creator of all through the simulator that came from that the Niburians had as well.
This was a no-no for Anu. Anu was not impressed with this.
He goes.
Dare I say pissed?
Yeah, you'll see in the account, Anu says something quite funny. He goes, blah, blah, blah. He did what? Heaven help him for what he just did. Very interesting saying, right? Heaven help. So Enki summons, his 2 sons to escort the Adapa to go meet Anu. And there were several players. I'll just give them real quick, and then we can move on to playing the account, because I know we're sneaking up on the end here. But there was Ningshita, who, remember, was the premier scientists who got the caduceus from his father Enki. Dumuzi was one of his other sons who shows up in the Sumerian kings list, and I did that in the Anunnaki and Nibiru. Mm-hmm. Okay, his father being Lugalbanda is one of the precursors to him. And then there's the Adapa and Anu, primarily. Okay?
Sure.
So, the dialogue takes place directly between the Adapa and Dumuzi and Ningshita, and between Adapa and Anu. And some really pertinent stuff comes out of that. Number one, you ask yourself, well, why the visit? Well, clearly Enki needed to expose the idea that he'd created life on another planet, and what the constraints were for this being to his father. I mean, it would be an expectation not to be overlooked.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm sure as a scientist he was called to the carpet to explain, and this is part of what he's doing. Now, the crazy part about this story is Enki meets up with the Adapa and predispositions him in the conversation that he knows he's going to have with Anu, and tells him what to say, what to do, and what not to do. Mm-hmm. This is pretty high level coaching. Okay, it's like, is he a free will being or is he your agent? Okay, well, a couple of things he tells him is he's not to eat or drink what's offered to him, because he knows on Nibiru they partake of a ritual that causes immortality by ingesting something liquid and eating something like a bread cake that affects their telomeres where they don't age. You know, this is their secret to immortality. Okay, so Enki tells him he's not to partake of that. So all of a sudden you go, okay, so you created us. What are the other constraints you gave us? Well, he tells us in this account, you were created to have a lifespan of 120 years and you got intelligence. Boom. That's it. That's what you got. And we don't know the full extent of what it means to have intelligence. You just cited a case of a quote unquote socially adept idiot savant who's doing amazing things with his mind. Well, this is prevalent all over the world, people doing out of the extraordinary things and capabilities. So
the fact that he had to be coached, by Enki on what to say, what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do.
That's almost like he's trying to appease his father in some way, and essentially what it ends up in is this being dressed in a disheveled way, presented to Anu as if he's in mourning, and that the being is a low-level primitive worker cowering in front of his father. That's the way it came off, and some people have talked about this being correlated with the first thoughts or insinuations that man was born in a fallen state and so on. Well, the decrees that Anu makes relative to the Adapa going back to Earth could be taken that way.
Do you think Enki made the Adapa a bit too much good, and then Anu found out, and then he's like, okay, don't tell Anu everything I did, please?
Well, that's part of it, is, I was reading this story and reading the account, trying to understand what is our destiny? What are we designed to be able to do? Are we only going to live 120 years and there's no reincarnation? There is reincarnation. We have access to higher. What is it? So I was reading these kind of things, seeing what this first progenitor of man, the primitive worker Adapa, what he was told by our genetic creators. And unfortunately, the creator of all didn't get to chime in on what his thoughts were on this in this account, but I would have loved to have heard that too. But we do know what Enki's design constraints were, and then what Anu did in response to that. Now, there's one piece I want to put in before we play the account. Sitchin tells a slightly augmented version of this, and he also references a missing piece that Stephanie Dolly doesn't have in her book. And I got to go research these a bit more, because there's lots of different Sumerian accounts of the same tale, and some of them are more complete than others, and some are other languages, okay, like Akkadian. So, in the fragment D for this Adapa tale, apparently, as part of the instructions that Anu gave the Adapa when he went back to the earth, was what his role was going to be as a healer and a first of 7 sages and healers for mankind. Because Anu really kind of in the account looked at this disheveled being who was being presented to him, dressed badly, hair unkempt, and looking like he was in a state of mourning, and really viewed it as, he took that to be, well, what did you create? Some downtrodden primitive worker? And that's what he used that very term, downtrodden. And he was disgusted by it and basically dismissed him from his presence. So what I want you to take away from that is,
How did the
I don't know
Adapa feel
exactly
about
what Enki was up to in terms of causing this first primitive worker. He was so proud of him, made him priest in Eridu, but had him cower in front of his father.
that's the thing. I'm thinking about the Adapa here. How does he feel about all this? I mean, does he feel ashamed of like having to, act
Well,
this,
I don't know. We're not told that in the account. And also,
He must have, Gerald. He must have felt in an awful state to have to act like this and feel.
Well, he must have, because Anu actually laughed at him and then said, "Don't you want to be immortal?
It's like treating a human as a dog.
What's wrong with you? Don't you want what we have?" And he was confused. I'm sure he was quite confused because he was told this is an elixir of death and a bread of death, not to take it. Well, Enki kind of misguided him because he didn't want him to have something that violated the constraints of whatever he had done that he didn't disclose to his father, whether it was about access to higher consciousness or what, because he was portraying him as a primitive worker, slave tool worker to work in the mines. Okay?
Perhaps Anu was trying to trick him into this bread to see would he take it.
Well, it may have been a trick. I'm not sure. But the other thing to come out of the account, and then I think we ought to play it, is Anu was trying to understand why this primitive worker had the knowledge to affect parameters in the holographic simulator, including changing the wind. Okay, and in alchemy, you'll find in the book The Alchemist, it's a very funny story. The young boy who was a shepherd gets caught up in between these two warring factions in the desert, and in order to prove that he's got a connection to the source, they asked him to prove it, and by doing so, he said, "Become the wind," right? Mm-hmm. So this kid is put on the spot. He either becomes the wind and creates a massive dust storm and impresses these warriors, or he dies on the spot. Very, very, very interesting. So Adapa was messing with the wind. Wow. And Anu wanted to know why this kind of knowledge was given to him and who gave it to him.
It sounds like Enki was caught between a rock and a hard place. He's trying to satisfy the demands of Anu. Anu's suspicious of Enki. What the hell is Enki up to here? He's done something, but he's not, and then he's telling the Adapa what to say and to do to be covert in what he actually did. And
right. Because the idea of encoding the access to higher consciousness, so that these slave beings that were, he viewed it as a jumpstart, temporary enslavement, and then within them they would have the ability to become Anunnaki. And as a matter of fact, I want to say it right now, based on what he did and where we are in our evolution of consciousness, we have become the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki are us. Mm-hmm. They're almost indistinguishable now.
Sure. Do you think then perhaps that Anu found out the truth in the end, and this is why we have the lamentations and he's going off in a frenzy, wiping out cities?
That's really unclear. What changed in the covenant between the Niburians and mankind before and after the Great Flood? Because before the flood, as you recall, the Sumerian kings list were serving full terms, very long terms. Then after it, when Enlil was in control of Mesopotamia, the kingship was jumping all around, like we talked about. That's when we finished with the lamentations that were on the two previous shows, I guess it was. So it's possible, but maybe they met their mining requirements and their milestones were getting filled in on the Gantt chart, and they didn't need so many workers anymore. Who knows? I don't know that. I wish I did know.
Sure.
Would it make any difference at this point? Probably not, but I'm more interested in our design constraints and our template to know what we're capable of so that we can fully participate in what we were designed to do.
Sure. Well, listen, Gerald, I'm going to finish off the show with the clip, so I'm going to say our goodbyes now. I'm going to finish off the show with it's a short 6-minute clip, and the Adapa goes to heaven. But yeah, Gerald, again, awesome talking to you. What another awesome, fascinating, super philosophy we're getting into today. But let's finish off with the tip.
Well, also keep in mind, just for the listeners that are listening to this, just know that Gazeta is absolutely Ningshita, who is Thoth. So now you're looking at the being who wrote the Emerald Tablets that we're about to get into, that's taking this first worker up to meet Anu. And the other thing that I didn't disclose about this is, in trying to understand what mankind's destiny was based on this encounter, it appears, and this is from Sitchins' work and others, and from the Emerald Tablets, that Thoth Ningshita himself was appointed by Anu to be mankind's teacher.
Mm.
So I want that to resonate with people. And when you see me making correlations between Ningshita and Jesus later in the tablets, where he talks about holding the keys to the kingdom, keep that in mind. He's right here holding the first being, escorting him to meet the highest ranking member of the Anunnaki Council, and he comes back to Earth committed to a mission. Because it's pretty clear the primitive workers are going to need an agent to become what they were designed to be.
Sure. Well, Gerald, I really can't wait to get into the Emerald Tablets and toss the Atlantean. Let's get there on the next episode. For now, we're going to play the Adapa tale.
All right, brother. Hey, it's been great, and I'm going to say my goodbyes now, and I can't wait to the next one. Hey, we need to let the listeners know when the next one's going to be.
Probably in about a week from now, Gerald, I would say.
Perfect. Okay.
Let's do it on the equinox, Gerald. Let's do it on March 21st on the equinox.
How about we do it on the 20th with the full solar eclipse?
Yeah? All right, let's do it. March 20th. Let's roll it out on March 20th.
Perfect, buddy. Okay.
Until then, Gerald, let's finish off the Adapa tale. Adapa goes to heaven.
All right. Love you, brother.
You too.
The Adapa tale. Several lines missing. Thoughtfulness. His word command like the word of Anu. He, Ea, made broad understanding perfect in him. Adapa, to disclose the design of the land. To him he gave wisdom, but did not give eternal life. At that time, in those years, he was a sage, son of Eridu. Ea created him as a protecting spirit among mankind. A sage, nobody rejects his word. Clever, extra wise, he was one of the Anunnaki, holy, pure of hands, the Pasisu priest who always tends the rites. He does baking with the bakers, does the baking with the bakers of Eridu. He does the food and water of Eridu every day. Sets up the offering table with his pure hands. Without him, no offering table is cleared away. He takes the boat out and does the fishing for Eridu. At that time, Adapa, the son of Eridu, when he had got the leader Ea out of bed, used to feed the bolt of Eridu every day. At the holy quay, Karusakar, he embarked in a sailing boat, and without a rudder his boat would drift. Without a steering pole he would take his boat out into the broad sea, gap of uncertain length. South wind, send him to live in the fish's home. South wind, through you send your brothers against me. Many there are. I shall still break your wing. No sooner had he muttered these words than South wind's wing had broken. For 7 days South wind did not blow toward the land. Anu called out to his vizier, Yelabrat, "Why hasn't the south wind blown toward the land for 7 days?" His vizier, Yelabrat, answered him, "My lord Adapa, the son of Ea, has broken the south wind's wing." When Anu heard this word, he cried, "Heaven help him!" rose up from his throne. "Send for him to be brought here." Ea, aware of heaven's ways, touched him, and made his wear his hair unkempt, clothed him in mourning garb, gave him instructions. "Adapa, you are to go before King Anu. You will go up to heaven, and when you go up to heaven, when you approach the gate of Anu, Dumuzi and Gesida will be standing in the gate of Anu. We'll see you. We'll keep asking you questions. Young man, on whose behalf do you look like this? On whose behalf do you wear mourning garb? You must answer. 2 gods have vanished from our country, and that is why I am behaving like this. They will ask, who are the 2 gods that have vanished from the country? And you must answer, they are Dumuzi and Gesida. They will look at each other and laugh a lot, will speak a word in your favor to Anu, will present you to Anu in a good mood. When you stand before Anu, they will hold out for you the bread of death, so you must not eat. They will hold out for you the water of death, so you must not drink. They will hold out a garment for you, so put it on. They will hold out oil for you, so anoint yourself. You must not neglect the instructions I have given you. Keep to the words that I have told you. The envoy of Anu arrived. Send to me Adapa. Who broke the south wind's wing? He made him take the way of heaven, and he, Adapa, went up to heaven. When he came to heaven, he approached the gate of Anu. Dumuzi and Gazeta were standing in the gate of Anu. They saw Adapa and cried, "Heaven, help him! Young man, on whose behalf do you look like this? Adapa, on whose behalf do you wear mourning garb? 2 gods have vanished from the country, and that is why I am wearing mourning garb. Who are the 2 gods who have vanished from the country? Dumuzi and Gazeta." They looked at each other and laughed a lot. When Adapa drew near to the presence of King Anu, Anu saw him and shouted, "Come here, Adapa! Why did you break Southwind's wing?" Adapa answered Anu, "My lord, I was catching fish in the middle of the sea for the house of my lord Ea, but he inflated the sea into a storm, and Southwind blew and sank me. I was forced to take up residence in the fish's home. In my fury I cursed Southwind. Dumuzi and Gazeta responded from behind him, spoke a word in his favor to Anu. His heart was appeased. He grew quiet. Why did Ea disclose to wretched mankind the ways of heaven and earth? Give them a heavy heart. It was he who did it. What can we do for him? Fetch him the bread of eternal life and let him eat. They fetched him the bread of eternal life, but he would not eat. They fetched him the water of eternal life, but he would not drink. They fetched him a garment, and he put it on himself. They fetched him oil, and he anointed himself. Anu watched and laughed at him. "Come, Adapa, why didn't you eat? Why didn't you drink? Didn't you want to be an immortal? Alas for downtrodden people! But Ea, my lord, told me, you mustn't eat, you mustn't drink. Take him and send him back to the earth." Gap of unknown length to
assimilate data and do what I do. And, I'm not generally one that toots my own horn, and I didn't even know what I was capable of until I was put into a situation that I had to perform that way, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, I graduated magna cum laude from UCSD, so I was a really good student. Mm-hmm. So I'm just sharing from that standpoint, with people, and I do it in a way, I call it hillbilly rules of learning, because I was 17 years old when I went off and back to San Diego, and I was totally a hillbilly, okay? And I was looking for a model on how to assimilate knowledge, because I'd never been exposed to anything like that.
Sure.
So what did I discover about learning, hillbilly learning? Well, from my exposure, I believe there are 4 levels of learning. And I think they're pretty straightforward. You start out at the rote level, is memorization. Mm-hmm. And then if you're inclined and it's interesting to you, you might try to understand it. Okay. So there's rote understanding. And then if you really want this knowledge to become wisdom in your life, you have to apply it. And most people know that. You have to apply something before it and make it real for you. Otherwise it just gets flushed, right? And then the last one is correlation. So once you've learned these chunks of wisdom, they end up as little tokens, if you will, stored in your cortronic processor, your brain. But then if you connect the dots between pieces of wisdom, I believe that's the highest level of learning. Okay. So let's kind of do these. So in the rote memorization state, there's actually, this is generally what people do to get through school.
Sure.
Is rote, okay? And then there's some understanding and maybe very little application, and definitely hardly any correlation unless you're a really gifted mathematician like Ramanuji. Mm-hmm. Okay, but in the rote process, I break that down into 4 different steps. There's a way to assimilate information from a book that we know works. And it has to do with the design of your brain and how it assimilates data into the short-term memory, churns on it, comes up with something, and then ends up in the long-term memory if it's pertinent to you or interesting. So in that process, generally, before you read something, you kind of want to have the questions in your mind of what it is you're trying to answer before you go expose yourself to this data. And for example, in physics and mathematics, they often will assign you all kinds of problem sets that you have to do when you read through this chapter and then do your problems, and generally have to turn them in as part of your homework, right? So there's your questions that you're trying to answer right there if you want to be pragmatic in physics or science. But lots of other courses are the same way. So now you're going to go through and survey that material. Look at all the pictures. see the extent of what you've got to assimilate. And while you're doing that, keep in mind those questions you have. You might put a little check mark. Okay, there's the answer to that question. That one. Okay. And you may not have to stay there and read it, but you're just surveying this point, trying to see the full scope of what it is you're trying to assimilate in your brain. Okay. So once you've surveyed it, you want to read it through. Okay. So now you've prepped yourself. You've created these little chasms in your memory such that they can be filled in by the questions when you find them. Okay. So you've created a space for the answers. So now you're reading it, and then comes the recitation to really make that rote memorization complete. And it's different for everybody. Okay. Some people can read something one time and they've got it. Other people got to do it 3 times. And everybody has to be honest with themselves and go, it takes me 3 times and it takes Joe over there 1. I have to toot my own kid's horn real quick. He was in middle school and they were just learning about, I think, the symbol pi. And he was quite a mental anomaly anyway, prodigy, if you will. This is Matthew, my oldest son, who's at Caltech. He graduates this year. Wow. As an engineer. Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah. So he came home one day, and it turns out the teacher was upset with him because he was sitting in the back of the room, not paying attention, reading a book while they were doing whatever they were doing, talking about pi and math and whatever. And I guess he took the rebuke and decided on the spot that he was going to show them that not only was he listening, but he was far above where they were. So he memorized pi to, I think, 99 decimal places and repeated it forward and backward within a 30-minute period.
Wow.
And he came home and did this for me, and I was like, dude, you must be the worst thorn in your teacher's side ever.
Wow.
And at that point, I probably should have recognized that he was a prodigy, and he really had no business being in public school. He really needed to be challenged. The way I challenged him at home, I taught him how to program a computer by the time he was 11 or 12. You know. And Michael, my other son, was an anomaly too. He had extreme social intelligence that, and everybody's wired differently, and we recognize that and tried to fan the flames of both of them. But not to get too far off the subject. So now we. Go ahead.
So just to add to that, just while you mentioned it spurred up my memory. Do you know who Daniel Tammet is?
No.
I love telling you about these people, Jared, because you don't know who it's like. I'm just like, you gotta look up.
That's the interesting thing. You're in Ireland, and you have a whole different set of people that are in your.
Are you ready for this? I'm gonna blow your mind. You ready for this? Okay. Daniel Tammet was born with. Everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your faithful host James, and we are talking to Mr. Gerald Clark today. Gerald is obviously the returning author doing a featured podcast on CapricornRadio.com, and we are enjoying Gerald's wonderful research and philosophy that he has learned and studied and brought to the attention of the world through his 2 books, Anunnaki of Nibiru and Seventh Planet Mercury Rising, his latest, which is what we're talking about today. And wonderful stuff from Gerald. Gerald, are you back with me?
Yeah, I am, brother.
Oh, great to have you here again, Gerald. We talked a little bit before the break about the hillbilly rules of learning, which we're going to get into first, and the Adapa tale, and these players, Gazeta, Demuzi, Adapa, Enki, and Anu, and what this all really means. And we're going to tie it together in the second half of the show. I guess let's start with the hillbilly rules for learning and what this means.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to do is, before we get into the Adapa tale, I want you to realize that Adapa was trained by Enki, and he was really smart. Okay, mm-hmm. He was the first priest serving the city of Eridu in the next tale. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about learning. We assimilate a lot of data. We look at lots of stuff. We're processing. We're trying to correlate. We're trying to end up with the state of the world, right? Well, in this process, I decided to disclose the method that I've used all through academia. For me and I'm really envious, but I still got to do 3 times. Well, do 3 times. Do whatever it takes with your handicap, if you will. Not everybody's wired the same way.
Sure.
And,
sure.
you know, yeah, I mean, I saw people that were wired that were just, you'd think, are you an automaton? How can you solve problems like that in your head? And I've met people like that, okay? So now you've questioned, you've surveyed, you read it, you're reciting the stuff that you have to memorize, and reciting oftentimes is really augmented by creating really silly acronyms for long lists of things. For instance, if you had to memorize every Latin prefix to all the measurements from exa, atta, peta, you know, millicenta, all the way through in order, you could create a silly acronym out of it and you memorize it. And this happens a lot in med school where they have long lists of Latin things you have to memorize.
Like the colors of the rainbow, people in
red,
England.
Orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. So, you know, people will make up a silly saying, or for the musical scale. Well, you do that for a long list. It's very helpful for rote memorization.
In England, we say for the colours of the rainbow, we said Richard of York gave battle in vain, which actually means something, that Richard of York gave battle in vain, which means that when you take the acronym, all the letters, the first capital letter of the sentence means the colours of the rainbow.
Exactly. So the fact that you memorize that, I have one, an acronym that I use to memorize all the zodiacal houses in order. I have one to memorize all the prefixes for measurements. It stuck with me from way back when. I have one for memorizing the animal kingdom. You know, I have a couple of them that I found out, and the sillier it is, the better. For some reason, I don't know why that is, but if you make it just, or it's relevant knowledge, like what you said, with the history encoded in it. But whatever it is, that's a good way to do it, to rote memorize long lists of things. And speaking of that,